skill set 4, the primary triads. So this is likely the third video you are using to learn all of skill set 4, and it'll be the last. So this is the last portion. The primary triads is something that can be complex. Some might think it's a little out of order for me to teach it to even beginning students, but I find that they can do it, and that if they do it from the beginning, they have a real great foundation that helps them later, and for many reasons. So I won't go into them here, but I've seen it through 30 years of teaching, the difference between those that knew these from the beginning and those that didn't. And while this first exposure to it can be a little heavy and take a little time, it's worth the time. And once they get it, then they do it in all the other keys, and it flows, and they're very capable even at a young age of 5 or 6. Okay, so I'm going to first just play them for you, and then I will explain what they are. In the key of C, the primary triads are built upon the scale degree 1, scale degree 4, and scale degree 5. And how do I know what 1, 4, and 5 are? Well, because it's all from that pentachord that you've been practicing. So note, whole, whole, half, whole. So within those 5 notes, or the first 5 notes of my scale, therefore scale degree 1 is C, 4 is F, 5 is G. So I want to notice that first. And then I'm going to build a triad. And I'm going to say out loud, 1 chord, C major. Then I'm going to go to the 4th note of the scale and build another triad. How do I know how to build that triad? Note, whole, whole, half, whole. And then the 1, 3, and 5 within that is the triad. And I'll say 4 chord, F major. Then I'm going to go to the 5th note of my scale. How do I know it's the 5th note? Because back here we figured out 1 was C, 4 is F, 5 is G. So I'm on 5 now. How do I know what 3 notes to play in my triad? Note, whole, whole, half, whole. Once more, that's the magic major formula. Note, whole, whole, half, whole. So I will play that triad, say 5 chord, G major. Okay, I'm going to more quickly go through the other keys now. 1 chord. So now I've gone to the key of G. So now I'm thinking G major, which you will know these first 5 notes, and also you'll be practicing the first 4 notes as a scale. 1 chord, G major. My 4th is C. 4 chord, C major. And then back here the 5th note was D, so I'm going to play 5 chord, D major. In the key of F, 1 chord, F major. Note, whole, whole, half, whole. 4 chord, B flat major. 5 chord, C major. Okay, so now one thing that might be helpful as you're learning this is first, just don't worry about it. You're not going to understand why this makes sense or why this is at first. Just do it. Just use the note, whole, whole, half, whole pattern to find 1, 4, and 5. And once you start on those 1, 4, or 5 notes, use note, whole, whole, half, whole to find what notes are in the triad. And that just is in itself just really powerful to help you get to know the keyboard and the patterns that are common to music, tonal music. So first of all, don't worry about it if you don't understand it. Just follow the steps and just begin. But second, as far as 1 chord and C major, all these things I'm having you say to kind of get you used to the language of the patterns or theory of music. It is important to know those names, so that's why I have you say them. But also, you might be wondering, well, why? How does that fit? Why do I have 2 names for 1 chord? And why was C major a 1 chord in one of the keys, and it was a 4 chord in it was a 4 chord in the key of G, and it was a 5 chord in the key of F. How does that work? Well, this analogy sometimes helps people. It has 2 names, just like you do. You are maybe a sister or a brother. You might be a mother or a father. You can be a father and a brother and an uncle all at the same time. So you have many names for yourself, but there's one name that's specific to you. My name is specifically Kate, and that's my first name. So C major is the specific name. That chord is always C major if it's the 1, the 3, and the 5 within the pattern of note, whole, whole, half, whole. It's always C major. But as that C major chord is in the context of different keys. So maybe he's in the key of C, which uses this set of notes. Well, he's placed on the scale degree 1, so we call him the 1 chord, and not the first chord. We don't want to confuse ourselves with intervals where we use first, second, third. So we're going to say 1 chord, which seems odd at first, but you'll get used to it. But now in the key of G, that's what that looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4. C is located on the 4th note of the scale. So in the context of G, the C chord is the 4 chord. In the scale of F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Scale degree 5 is where we find C. But you notice he was always C major. Now, the last point I'd like students to understand is why play the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Like, there's actually a 2 chord and a 3 chord and a 6 chord and a 7 chord, so we could go up the whole scale set. 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, and then back to the 1. So there's all of those chords. Why are we just learning the 1, the 4, and the 5? Well, they're called primary, or most important, because, well, for one, let's just give you a couple reasons why I consider them primary, is because they're all major. All the other chords, if we analyze them, they would be what we call minor or diminished. So these are the only chords when we play triads using just the set of our notes in our major scale. They're the only ones that are major triads. Okay, and once again, major means that note, whole, whole, half, whole. You've got the notes in that major pattern, okay? Secondly, between the 1, the 4, and the 5, if I put this D on the bottom, we have the full set of the scale. In other words, any melody that note in that scale that we choose, we will have a chord that can accompany it and will contain that melody note so that it will sound like it belongs. If we're playing dominantly, notes that are in that C triad in our melody, so that C belongs with it, because so many of the notes in the triad of C were in that melody. We'll learn more about that in other places, but that's just to answer some of the questions that have arisen as students have tackled the primary triads and tried to understand why they're important, how they work, and begin to comprehend the patterns that are there in music. And that's, I guess, the last point, is that any tonal piece could pretty much be simmered down, or could have these harmonies accompany that melody, as long as that melody stays in that key of C and doesn't, modulate to a different key or borrow from another key. You're going to be able to use just the 1, the 4, and the 5 to accompany that melody. So if you're hearing something on the radio, you want to sound out the melody and find some chords to accompany it. If you know what key you're in and you've sounded out your melody and you understand some basics of, just matching those melodies, notes to the harmony, you just know, oh, well, here's the 1, the 4, and the 5 in that key, and boom, you can just improvise a harmony to go with that melody very quickly. Or when you're learning a piece, you'll recognize those chords that the composer has used, and therefore you can sight read it more easily, you can memorize it more easily, you're understanding the concepts and the words, so to say, that are in that piece, and your learning will be much more effective and efficient.